Chapter 36. Another Stranger. Mr. Matthews and his son first heard of the stranger through Lou Gordon, the mail carrier who stopped at the mill on his way to Flag with the week's mail. The native rode close to the shed and waited until the saw had shrieked its way through the log of oak and the carriage had rattled back to the first position. And then, with the dignity belonging to one of his station as a government officer, he relieved his overcharged mouth of an astonishing quantity of tobacco and drawled, "Howdy, gentlemen." "Howdy, Lou," returned young Matt from the engine and old Matt from the saw. "Reckon them boards is for a floor there in Joe Gardner's new cabin?" "Yeah," returned old Matt. "We ought to got 'em out last week, but seems we can't get at it with the burying and all." "'Pears like y'all are getting mighty proud of this here neighborhood. Ponchin' floors used to be good enough for anyone to dance on. Be a buildin' board houses next, I reckon." Mr. Matthews laughed. "Oh, bring your logs over to Fall Creek when you're ready to build, Lou, and we'll sure do you right." The representative of the government recharged his mouth. "I 'lowed as I would," he returned. "I ain't one of this here kind that don't want to see no changes. Government's all about to be making improvements. Inspector allowed last trip we'd be sure of getting mail about twice a week at Flag next summer. This here's sure bound to be big country some day. Talking about new-fangled things, though, men, I seen the blamedest sight last night, that there over in them woods. I hit her with a plain old wonder." Kicking one foot from a wooden stirrup and hitching sideways in the saddle, he prepared for an effort. "Little feller he is. Ain't as tall as Preachin' Bill even. And fat, my goodness. He's as fat as a possum in simian time. He don't walk, he can't, just naturally waddles on them little duck legs of his. He was sure the prettiest little old face, all red and white and round as a walnut, and friends with whitest hair you ever did see. And clothes, my goodness, men." In the pause, the speaker deliberately relieved his overcharged mouth. The two in the mill waited breathlessly. "Long-tailed coat and stovepipe hat, and cane with a gold head as big as a tater. My goodness, men, there ain't been ary such a sight about 1,000 miles of these here hills, and doin's, my Lord Almighty." The thin form of the native doubled up as each broke into a laugh that echoed and re-echoed through the little valley and ended up in a wild "whoo-ee," say. "When he got out of the old shack last night at the Forks, Uncle Ike, he ketched sight of him and says he to me, 'By thunders, Lou, looky there, talk about prosperity. I'm dummed if that ain't old Santa Claus comin' to the Forks for the summertime. By thunders, what is that?' And when Santa come in, he wanted, you know what he reckoned he wanted? A bath. Yes, sir, he dad bird me, he didn't. A bath. Whoo-ee, ought to seen Uncle Ike. He told him, by thunders, he could give him a bite to eat and a place to sleep, but he'd be pinched and bitten by rattlers and clawed by wildcats and clawed by the old hogs and et by buzzards, everlasting that before he'd tote water enough for someone to swim in. By thunderous, what?" "What's he doing here?" asked Mr. Matthews when the mountaineer had recovered from another explosion. Lou shook his head as he straightened himself in the saddle. "Blab me if I can tell. Just wouldn't tell all last night. Just he wanted a bath. Called Uncle Ike some new-fangled kind of a savage, and this old man allowed he'd show him. He'd sure have him persecuted for insulting a government servant when the inspector done come around. Yes, he did. Oh, that was doin's over at the Forks last night." Again the mail carrier's laugh echoed through the woods. "Well, I reckon I best be moseying along. He wasn't up this morning when I left. I reckon he'll show up round here some time before sundown. Him and Uncle Ike, they don't hurt hitch worth a cent, and he'll be hunting prouder folks. I done told the old man he'd better herd for a while, for if he was that to get loose in these woods, there wouldn't be nary a deer nor a bear left come Thanksgiving time. Well, Uncle Ike, he says, by thunders, he'd let me know that he weren't running no damned asylum. He allowed he was a postmaster, by thunders, and had all he could do to keepin' a dad-burned government straight. Well, later that afternoon, Lou's prophecy was fulfilled. A wagon going down the creek with a load of supplies for the distillery stopped at the mill shed, and the stranger began climbing carefully down over the wheels. Bud Wilson on his high seat winked and nodded at Mr. Matthews and his son as though it was the greatest joke of the season. "Hold them horses, driver. Hold 'em tight, sir." "Oh, I got 'em, mister. I got 'em here tight," responded Bud promptly. The mules stood with their drooping heads and sleepy eyes, the lines underneath their feet. The gentleman was feeling carefully about for the hub of the wheel with a foot that, stretch as he might, could not touch it by a good 6 inches. "Oh, that's right, man, just right. Hold 'em tight now, sir. Start now and break a leg for sure. Then what would Sarah and the girls do? Oh, blast it all, where's that darn step? I can't stay here all day. Bring a ladder. Bring a high chair or table or a box, a big box or something. Look out, I say, just look out. Blast it all, what do you mean?" This last was called forth by young Matt, that lifted the little man bodily to the ground as an ordering man would lift a child. To look up at the young giant, the stranger tipped back his head until his shiny silk hat was in danger of falling into the dirt. "Bless my soul, what a specimen! What a specimen indeed!" And then, with a twinkle in his eye, "Which one of the boys are you, anyway?" At this, the 3 mountaineers roared with laughter. With his dumpy figure in the long coat and his round face under the tall hat, the young man was irresistible. He fairly shone with good humor. His cheeks were polished like big red apples, his white hair had the luster of silver, his blue eyes twinkled, and his silk hat glistened, his gold watch guard sparkled, and his patent leathers glistened, and the cane with the big gold head gleamed in the sunlight. "Well, that's him, Doc," called the driver. "That's the feller there who wallered Wash Gibbs like I was a-tellin' you. Strongest man in the hills, he is. Dad burn me if I believe he knows how strong he is." "Oh, Dad burn Doc," muttered the stranger. "What would Sarah and the girls say?" He waddled to the wagon and reached up one fat hand with a $50 to Bud. "Here you are, driver. Get some cigars with that. Cigars, mind ye, or candy. I'll stay here. Mind you don't get anything to drink. Nothing to drink, I say." Bud gathered up the reins and woke the sleepy mules up with a vigorous jerk. "Oh, nary a drink, Doc, nary a drink. Thank you kindly all the same, but I best be moseying along, to be getting on now. Ought to be there an hour ago. If I can do anything for you just let me know. I live over on Sow Coon Gap when I'll get to home. Come on over and visit with me. Young Matt, he'll guide you over." As he watched the wagon down the valley, the stranger mused. "Oh, dear. Quite sure that fella would buy a drink. Quite sure he will." When the wagon had disappeared, he turned to Mr. Matthews and his son. "Well, according to that feller, I am not far from a sheep ranch kept by Mr. Howitt. That is Mr. Daniel Howitt, a fine-looking gentleman with fine brown eyes and a great voice, a gentleman. He sure is, gentlemen. If he is keeping sheep in this wilderness, blast it all, just like him. Oh, yes, just like him. Always keeping somebody's sheep. He was born to be a shepherd. He was born to be. Do you know him?" At mention of Mr. Howitt's name, young Matt looked at his father quickly. When the stranger paused, he answered, "Yes, sir, we do know Dad Howitt. Is he a friend of yours?" Dad Howitt, Doc and Dad. Well, what would Sarah and the girls say? Oh, friend of mine, young man. Daniel and David. I am David, and Daniel and David lay on the same blanket when they was babies. Played in the same alley, school together, same classes, in college together, and next door neighbors. Know him, blast it all. Yes, I do. Where is this sheep place?
Again the two woodsmen exchanged glances. The elder Matthews spoke. Well, it's not so far from here, sir. The ranch, it belongs to me and my son, but Mr. Howard will be out of the hills somewhere with the sheep now. You'd better go home with us and have supper, and the boy, he'll take you down this evening.
Oh, well, that's kind, sir, very kind indeed. My, the man at the post office, he's a savage, sir. Blasted old incohonorable savage. My name is Coughlin, Dr. David Coughlin of Chicago, practicing physician of 40 years. Don't do anything now, not much, that is. Sir and the girls, they won't let me. What might your name be, sir?
Grant Matthews, my boy there, has the same. We're mighty glad to meet any friend of Dad's, I can tell you that. He sure has been God's blessing to this neighborhood.
Soon they started homeward, young Matt going ahead to do the chores and to tell his mother of the coming guest, while Mr. Matthews followed more slowly with the doctor. Shortening his stride to conform to the slow pace of the smaller man, the mountaineer told his guest about the shepherd and how he had come to them, of his life, and how he had won the hearts of the people. When he told how Mr. Howard had educated Sammy, buying her books himself from his meager wages, the doc interrupted in his quick way. Oh, yes, that's just like him, just like him. Always giving away everything he's earned. He's made others give too. Blast it all, he's cost me thousands of dollars treating patients of his that would never pay a cent. Not a cent, sir. Proud, though. Proud as a Lucifer. Fine old family. Finest in the country, sir. Right to be proud. Right to be.
Old Matt scowled at his return coldly. He sure don't seem that way to us, mister. He's as common as an old shoe.
And then the mountaineer told how his son loved the shepherd and tried to explain what the old scholar's friendship had meant to them. The stranger interjected. Oh, same old thing. Same old trick. Did me that way as well. Does everyone that way. Same old Daniel. Proud, though. Can't help it. Just can't help it.
The big man answered with still more warmth. Well, you ought to hear how he talks to us folks when we get meetin' at the Cove schoolhouse. He's as good as any preacher you ever heard, except that he don't put on as much, maybe. Why, sir, when we buried Jim Lane week before last, everyone allowed that he'd done as well as a regular parson.
And at this, Dr. Coughlin stopped short and leaned against a convenient tree for support, looking up at his big host with merriment he could not hide. Parson, Daniel Howard talked as good as a parson. Blast it all. Dan is one of the biggest D's in the United States. As good as a parson, I should think so. Why, man, he's my pastor. My pastor, biggest church, greatest crowds in the city. Well, why, my. What would Sarah and the girls say? He stood there, gasping and shaking with laughter, until old Matt, finding the ridiculous side of the situation, joined in with a guff that fairly drowned the sound of the little man's merriment. When they finally moved on again, the doctor said, And you never knew, eh? The papers, they was always full. His real name is...
Oh, stop.
Old Matt spoke so suddenly, in such a tone, the other jumped in alarmment. I ain't meanin' no harm, Doc, but you oughtn't to tell his name, and anyway, I don't wish to know. Preacher or no preacher, he's a man, and that he is, and that's what counts in this here country. If Dad had wanted us to know about him, I reckon he'd have told us, and I don't want to hear it until he's ready. The doctor stopped short again. Right, sir, right. Daniel, he has his reasons, of course, I forgot. That savage at the post office tried to interrogate me and tried to draw me. I was close on guard, you see. A feller in the wagon tried, too. Still on guard, though. But you caught me, blast it all. I like you. Fine specimen, that boy of yours. He's fine.
When they reached the top of the ridge, the stranger looked over the hills with an exclamation of delight.
Grand, sir, grand! Why, wish sir and the girls could see this, don't you wonder? No wonder that Daniel stayed. That holler down there, you say, way down there. That there mutton holler? Daniel lives down there. Blast it all now. Come on, man, let's get going.
As they drew near the house, Pete came slowly up the old trail and met them at the gate. End of chapter 36.